History is not a monolith. It is not a single grand story of kings and battles, treaties and revolutions. It is a mosaic crafted from a million individual lives, each with its own private joys, its own silent heartbreaks, and its own forgotten dreams. We often gaze upon the grand figures of the past, the emperors and queens in their stiff, formal portraits, and we see them as symbols, as characters in a play. We forget that beneath the crowns and the jewels, behind the weight of their titles, were living, breathing human beings. Today, we begin a journey into one such life, a life that began in the fairy tale splendor of a German Grand Duchy and was destined for the very pinnacle of imperial power, a life that would become a symbol of an entire era, its elegance, its aspirations, and ultimately, its cataclysmic fall. This is the story of Cecilia, Duchess of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, the last crown princess of the German Empire. To understand Cecilia, we must first understand the world that made her, a world of immense wealth and rigid tradition, a world dancing on the precipice of a volcano, blissfully unaware of the fires raging below. This is not just the story of a princess, it is the story of the twilight of an age. So let us begin not at the end, in the rubble and shadows, but at the beginning, in a time of gilded promise, when the world seemed stable, and the future for a girl like Cecilia looked as bright and limitless as the heavens themselves. The world Cecilia was born into, on September the 20th, 1886, was the German Empire. It was a nation that was in many ways an adolescent giant, young, powerful, insecure, and immensely proud. Forged only 15 years earlier in the crucible of war against France, this new Germany was a federation of kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, all dominated by the formidable Kingdom of Prussia and its ruling house, the Hohenzollern. At its head sat Kaiser Wilhelm II, a man who embodied the contradictions of his nation. He was intelligent and modern, fascinated by technology and naval power, yet he was also deeply reactionary, clinging to a medieval concept of monarchy by divine right. He was obsessed with the military, rarely seen out of uniform, and he instilled in his country a culture of discipline, order, and unwavering patriotism. This was the era of Preußentum, the Prussian spirit, where duty, honor, and obedience were the highest virtues. This was a society built on hierarchy. At the top was the Kaiser and the royal houses. Below them, the powerful landed aristocracy, the Junkers, who commanded the army and the civil service. Then came the new industrial magnates, whose factories were making Germany an economic powerhouse. And finally, the burgeoning middle and working classes. Every person had their place, and every place was known. In this world, the role of women, especially aristocratic women, was rigidly defined. Their purpose was to be decorative, beautiful, and above all, dynastic. A princess's value was measured by the prestige of the man she married and the number of male heirs she could produce. Love was a fortunate accident, not a prerequisite. Marriage was a matter of statecraft, a cold calculation of bloodlines, alliances, and political advantage. The map of Europe was held together by a fragile web of royal cousins, and a wedding could be as significant as a treaty. Into this rigid, powerful, and patriarchal world, Cecilia was born. But her origins were not purely Prussian. They were a unique blend of German discipline and something far more enigmatic, something from the vast, mysterious East. Cecilia Auguste Marie was a Duchess of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, a Grand Duchy in northern Germany ruled by one of the oldest dynasties in Europe. Her father, Grand Duke Frederick Francis III, was a gentle, kind-hearted man, but he was plagued by a debilitating weakness, severe asthma, and a weak heart. The damp, cold climate of his ancestral home was quite literally poison to him.
Her mother was a different force of nature entirely. Grand Duchess Anastasia Michaelna was a Romanov, a granddaughter of Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. She was beautiful, vivacious, fiercely intelligent, and utterly uninterested in the stiff formalities of German court life. She had been married to the Grand Duke at a young age and found Schwerin provincial and stifling. Anastasia was a woman of passions. She adored the theater, was officially good tennis player, and had an independent spirit that constantly chafed against the constraints of her position. Because of the Grand Duke's health, the family lived a peculiar bifurcated life. Summers were spent in their German domains, fulfilling the duties required of them, They would reside in their magnificent castle, a confection of towers and domes that looked like something out of a storybook. Here, life was formal, governed by protocol. Cecilia and her siblings, Alexandrian and Frederick Francis, would learn the ways of their German heritage. But as soon as the first autumn chill touched the air, the entire court would pack up and migrate south like a flock of migratory birds. Their destination was Cannes, on the French Riviera. Here, Grand Duchess Anastasia had built a sprawling estate, the Villa Winden. This was her kingdom, and in it she created a world far removed from the strictures of Germany. For the young Cecilia, this annual migration meant she grew up in two parallel universes. Schwerin was the world of duty, of her German identity, of her destiny as a princess. Cannes was the world of freedom, of sunshine, of her mother's Russian soul. In Cannes, she wasn't just a duchess, she was a young girl. She could run in the gardens, feel the sea breeze on her face, and interact with a cosmopolitan mix of European royalty and high society, who flocked to the Riviera for its climate and social scene. She became fluent in French and developed a chic, effortless sense of style that was far more Parisian than Prussian. This upbringing gave her a unique polish. She had the dignity of a German princess, but also the charm and sophistication of the French and the passionate spirit of her Romanov ancestors. It was a potent and captivating combination. However, this idyllic existence was lived under a constant shadow. Her father's health was a source of perpetual anxiety. In 1897, when Cecilia was just 11 years old, tragedy struck. Grand Duke Frederick Francis III died under mysterious circumstances in Cannes. The official report stated he had stumbled and fallen from a low wall during an asthma attack. However, the official account was not universally accepted, and unconfirmed rumors persisted for years, speculating that his death was a suicide. For a sensitive young girl on the cusp of adolescence, the loss of her beloved, gentle father was a devastating blow, one that would instill in her a deep-seated sense of life's fragility. After his death, her mother's ties to Germany weakened further. The family spent even more time away, and their connection to Russia deepened. From 1898 to 1904, Cecilia spent long, glorious summers visiting her Romanov relatives. She was dazzled by the almost mythical opulence of the Tsar's court, a world of unimaginable luxury and scale that made even German palaces seem modest. These experiences further shaped her, adding a final layer of Slavic mystique to her German-French upbringing. She was becoming a truly European princess, but one whose destiny was about to be irrevocably tied to the fate of the Hohenzollerns. As Cecilia blossomed into womanhood, the question of her future began to loom large. With her lineage, beauty, and grace, she was one of the most eligible princesses in Europe, but no one could have predicted just how high she would fly. The heir to the German throne was Crown Prince Wilhelm. He was the eldest son of the formidable Kaiser Wilhelm II. But in temperament, he was his father's opposite.
Where the Kaiser was stern, authoritarian, and obsessed with duty, the Crown Prince was charming, artistic, and notoriously frivolous. He loved fast cars, sports, and most of all, the company of beautiful women. He was known for his slender frame, which earned him the nickname the Bony Stork, and for a rebellious streak that constantly frustrated his father. The Kaiser worried about his son's lack of Prussian seriousness and his playboy reputation. For Wilhelm, life was a grand game, and he had little patience for the tedious affairs of state. The German court desperately needed to find a wife for their wayward prince. They needed a woman who was not only of suitable rank, but who could also ground him, give him a sense of responsibility, and provide the empire with healthy male heirs. The search was on. The moment of destiny arrived in June 1904. The occasion was the wedding of Cecilia's older brother, Frederick Francis IV, in Schwerin. The guest list was a who's who of European royalty, and among them was the 22-year-old German crown prince. Cecilia, now 17, was a vision. She was no longer a girl, but a young woman of striking beauty. Taller than most women of her time, she possessed a natural elegance and a commanding presence. But it was her coloring that set her apart from the typical German ideal of blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty. Cecilia had a cascade of thick, dark brown hair and large, expressive dark eyes that seemed to hold a hint of Slavic melancholy. In a sea of German princesses, she was exotic, vibrant, and utterly captivating. From the moment Crown Prince Wilhelm laid eyes on her, he was smitten. He was tired of the formal, stiff princesses he was usually presented with. Cecilia was different. She was a breath of fresh air. She was not intimidated by him.
She conversed with him easily in flawless French, her wit and intelligence shining through. He was charmed by her beauty, her poise, and the hint of an untamed spirit but he sensed beneath her refined exterior. For Cecilia, the attention from the heir to the most powerful empire in continental Europe must have been overwhelming. Wilhelm was dashing, charming, and attentive. He represented a future of unimaginable prestige and power. In a world where she had been raised to expect an arranged marriage, the prospect of marrying a man she was genuinely attracted to and who seemed so enchanted by her must have felt like a dream come true. The courtship was a whirlwind. The Kaiser, delighted that his son had finally found a suitable princess who seemed to capture his interest, gave his enthusiastic approval. The match was perfect on paper, a union between the ruling House of Prussia and one of Germany's oldest noble families, further cementing the unity of the empire. Just 3 months after their first meeting, on September 4th, 1904, the official engagement was announced. The couple was at Gilbin's, the Mecklenburg family's hunting lodge. Wilhelm presented Cecilia with a simple cloverleaf pin as a token. The news electrified Germany. The nation fell in love with their future empress. Newspapers were filled with her photographs and stories of the fairy tale romance. At just 18 years old, Cecilia of Mecklenburg-Schwerin was on the brink of a destiny greater than she could have ever imagined. The wedding was planned for the following summer in Berlin, and it was to be an event of unprecedented scale and magnificence. Berlin, June 6, 1905. The capital of the German Empire was in the grip of a feverish celebration. This was more than just a royal wedding. It was a powerful statement of national pride and imperial splendor. The German people, so accustomed to military parades and displays of industrial might, were now treated to a spectacle of romance and tradition. And at its center was the young woman who had captured the nation's heart, their future Kaiser and Cecilia. The day began with a deafening salute of 72 cannons.
From early morning, what was reported to be hundreds of thousands of citizens had packed the grand boulevard of Unenlinden, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bridal procession. The city was a sea of black, white, and red, the colors of the imperial flag. First came the procession of royal guests, a glittering parade that showcased the interconnectedness of European royalty. Kings, queens, archdukes, and princes from across the continent rode in magnificent carriages, a final poignant gathering of the old world order before it would be consumed by war. Then came the bride. Cecilia sat in a spectacular gilded carriage drawn by 8 white horses. The carriage itself was a work of art, with glass panels that allowed the adoring crowds a clear view, and the sight they saw took their breath away. She was wearing a gown of shimmering pearl white silk woven with silver roses. A gossamer veil was held in place by a breathtaking myrtle wreath intertwined with a new diamond tiara, a gift from the Hohenzollern family. Her dark hair and eyes provided a stunning contrast to the whiteness of her attire. She looked serene, radiant, and every inch a future empress. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a wave of affection and hope directed at this one young woman. Her destination was the royal chapel in the Berlin Palace. There, Crown Prince Wilhelm awaited, looking impossibly handsome and regal in the uniform of the Garde du Corps Regiment, complete with a gleaming silver eagle-topped helmet. The ceremony itself was steeped in centuries of Hohenzollern tradition. The court chaplain delivered a sermon on the sacred duties of marriage and monarchy. As the couple exchanged rings, Cecilia officially became Her Imperial and Royal Highness, the German Crown Princess and Crown Princess of Prussia. At that moment, her old life as a Duchess of Mecklenburg-Schwerin was over. A new, far more demanding and far more public life had begun. The celebrations that followed lasted for days. There were state banquets, gala performances at the opera, and a grand torchlit procession. One of the most symbolic events was the Fackeltanz, a traditional torchlit dance where the new crown princess was ceremoniously led around the ballroom by the ministers of state, a ritual symbolizing her formal acceptance into the Prussian court. For Cecilia, it must have been an intoxicating, overwhelming experience. She had been plucked from a relatively quiet life and placed at the very center of a powerful and demanding empire. She was now one of the most famous women in the world. The German people saw in her the promise of a new generation, a future that would be as glorious as the present. Her beauty, grace, and perceived innocence were projected onto the nation's own aspirations. As the celebrations drew to a close and the young couple began their new life together, no one could have foreseen the trials that lay ahead. The cheering crowd saw a fairy tale come to life. They saw a handsome prince and a beautiful princess destined to live happily ever after. They could not see the cracks that would soon appear in the flawless facade. They could not know that the magnificent empire celebrating so joyously that day was in reality living on borrowed time. And they could not imagine the profound and tragic journey that awaited their beloved new crown princess, a journey that would take her from this pinnacle of joy to the depths of despair. Cecilia's new life unfolded across a series of magnificent but intimidating royal residences. Her primary home with Wilhelm was the Marble Palace in Potsdam, a beautiful neoclassical building on the shore of the Hilliger Sea. For grander state occasions, they used the nearby New Palace, a colossal Baroque masterpiece built by Frederick the Great, with over 200 rooms, vast galleries, and a theater. To a girl who had spent her happiest years in the sunny intimacy of a French villa, these German palaces must have felt cavernous and overwhelming.
Life within their walls was governed by a rigid, unyielding protocol that had changed little in centuries. Every day was scheduled, every interaction was formal. The spontaneity and freedom she had known in Cannes were gone, replaced by the stiff etiquette of the Prussian court. At the center of this world were her new parents-in-law. Her mother-in-law, Empress Augusta Victoria, known as Donna, was a deeply religious and conservative woman who embodied traditional Prussian virtues. While she was outwardly kind to Cecilia, there was a generational and temperamental gap between them. Donna was a product of the old world, while Cecilia, with her French sophistication and Russian soul, was something new and perhaps a little unsettling. Her relationship with her father-in-law, the Kaiser, was far warmer. Wilhelm II was utterly charmed by his new daughter-in-law. He adored her beauty, her intelligence, and her vivacious spirit. He saw in her a regal quality that he felt was sometimes lacking in his own family. He affectionately called her Patsy and showered her with attention and gifts. This imperial favor was a double-edged sword. It gave Cecilia a powerful ally and a protected position at court, but it also meant she was constantly on display, expected to be the perfect embodiment of Hohenzollern dignity. She threw herself into her new role with grace and diligence. She mastered the complexities of court life, undertook her first public duties, and became a patroness of various charities, particularly those related to women's education and welfare. She learned to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics, to smile when she was scrutinized, and to perform her part flawlessly. The public saw a poised and dedicated crown princess. Only a few could guess at the loneliness that lay beneath the perfect surface. While she fulfilled her duties with quiet grace, it was in the realm of fashion that Cecilia truly captured the public imagination. In an era when German court fashion was often seen as heavy, formal, and frumpy, Cecilia was a revolution. Her style was a reflection of her unique upbringing. It was chic, sophisticated, and distinctly Parisian. She favored the leading designers from the fashion capital of the world, like Worth and Poiret. She rejected the stiff, high-collared dresses favored by her mother-in-law for softer silhouettes, more fluid fabrics, and a more modern, understated elegance. She had an innate understanding of what suited her tall, slender frame, and she wore her clothes with an air of effortless confidence. German women were mesmerized. They had never had a royal trendsetter like this before. Suddenly, the Cecilia look was all the rage. Magazines printed patterns of her dresses. Women copied her hairstyles, which were often simpler and more elegant than the elaborate updo of the time. Her most famous trademark was her hats. Cecilia turned headwear into an art form. She favored large, wide-brimmed hats, often adorned with dramatic feathers or flowers, which perfectly framed her beautiful face and dark hair. Wearing these creations required a certain poise and confidence, and they became a symbol of her unique and fashionable persona. She wasn't just following trends, she was creating them. Her influence went beyond mere aesthetics. In a way, Cecilia's style was a form of soft diplomacy. She projected a new image of Germany to the world, not just as a militaristic and industrial power, but as a nation of culture, sophistication, and modern elegance. She was the beautiful, fashionable face of the German Empire, a symbol of its confidence and its place among the great nations of Europe. For the German people, she was a source of immense pride. She was their princess, and in their eyes, she was the most beautiful and stylish in the world. Above all other duties, Cecilia's primary role was to secure the future of the dynasty. In this, she succeeded brilliantly. In July 1906, just over a year after her wedding, she gave birth to her first child, Prince Wilhelm. The birth of a future heir was met with national jubilation. In the years that followed, more children arrived in quick succession. Prince Louis Ferdinand in 1907, Prince Hubertus in 1909, and Prince Friedrich Georg in 1911. The nursery in the Marble Palace was full. Cecilia adored being a mother. It was in her relationship with her children that she found the genuine love and purpose that was increasingly absent from her marriage. She was a devoted, hands-on mother, a stark contrast to the distant, formal parenting style common among the aristocracy of the time. She insisted on spending hours with her children each day, playing with them, reading to them, and creating a bubble of warmth and affection amidst the cold formality of the court. The family she created was her sanctuary, her private world, where she was not the crown princess, but simply Mama. But as her happiness as a mother grew, her heartbreak as a wife deepened. The charming, attentive suitor she had married had quickly reverted to his old ways. Crown Prince Wilhelm was fundamentally unsuited to the life of a staid, dutiful husband and heir. He was a creature of impulse and pleasure, and he found married life and the responsibilities that came with it to be a bore. His infidelities, which had perhaps been rumored before the marriage, became a poorly kept secret at court. He pursued affairs with a string of actresses, singers, and society beauties, both in Germany and on his frequent trips abroad. For Cecilia, this was a source of constant and profound humiliation. She was a deeply traditional woman who had entered marriage with a sincere heart, only to be met with betrayal and disrespect. Wilhelm wasn't just unfaithful, he could be emotionally cruel. He was a controlling husband, given to fits of jealousy, yet he saw no contradiction in his own promiscuous behavior. He criticized her, undermined her, and left her feeling isolated and alone. The vibrant, confident young woman who had charmed a prince began to recede, replaced by a wife learning to cope with a silent, gnawing sorrow. The German public saw the perfect royal family in smiling photographs, but behind closed doors, the dream had curdled into a painful reality. There were moments of utter despair. According to later accounts, including those from her own children, the young crown princess was at times so distraught by her husband's behavior that she privately contemplated suicide. It is a chilling thought. The most celebrated young woman in the German Empire, a woman who seemingly had everything, felt so trapped in her gilded cage that she saw no way out. In her profound loneliness, Cecilia sought emotional connection where she could find it, and she found it in an unlikely place, with one of her husband's own aides de camp, Baron Otto von Düngar-Oberau. The Baron was everything Wilhelm was not. He was kind, attentive, and intellectually curious. He listened to her, respected her, and offered her the emotional intimacy she craved. A deep and powerful bond formed between them. Whether this developed into a physical affair is unknown, as historical sources are discreet on that point. What is undeniable, however, is that it was a profound emotional bond. The Baron became her confidant, her companion in a lonely court. In him, she found a solace that her husband refused to provide. This relationship was a dangerous game played out under the nose of the court and her jealous husband, but it was a testament to her desperate need for genuine human connection. Around this time, Cecilia also began to channel her hopes and frustrations into a grand project, the building of a new perfect family home. She had grown weary of the vast, impersonal palaces she inhabited. She dreamed of a home on a more human scale, a place that would be a true sanctuary for her and her children, away from the prying eyes of the court.
The Kaiser, ever indulgent of his daughter-in-law, granted her wish. In the new garden in Potsdam, construction began on a new residence. It was to be called Cecilienhof, Cecilia's court. The design, heavily influenced by Cecilia herself, was a world away from traditional Prussian architecture. It was modeled on an English Tudor manor house, with half-timbered walls, picturesque courtyards, and cozy, comfortable interiors. Cecilienhof was more than just a house. It was a physical manifestation of Cecilia's dreams. It was her attempt to build the happy family life that was eluding her. She envisioned it as a place of warmth, laughter, and love, a rustic escape where her children could grow up, and where perhaps her fractured marriage could somehow be healed. Construction began in 1913. She poured her heart into the project, overseeing every detail. It was her great hope for the future, a future she prayed would be more peaceful than the present. She could not have known that by the time her dream home was completed, the world that had allowed her to build it would be engulfed in flames, and she could never have imagined the final terrible irony of history that would one day befall her beloved Cecilienhof. As Cecilia navigated her private struggles, the world outside the palace walls was becoming an increasingly dangerous place. The first decade of the 20th century, often remembered as a golden age, the Belle Epoque, was in reality a time of rising tensions and paranoid rivalries. The great powers of Europe were engaged in a frantic arms race, building vast armies and fleets of powerful new battleships. A web of rigid alliances, the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia on one side, and the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on the other, divided the continent into two armed camps. The royal family, like many in Europe, seemed to exist in a state of willful denial. Life continued its glittering course. There were summers spent at the Kiel Week sailing regatta, competing against their British cousins. There were lavish state visits and opulent balls. They were all part of one great extended royal family, linked by blood and marriage. The idea that they would lead their nations into a catastrophic war against one another seemed to many unthinkable. But the unthinkable was drawing closer every day. A series of diplomatic crises brought the continent to the brink of war time and again. The air was thick with nationalism, suspicion, and a strange fatalistic belief in the inevitability of a great conflict that would clear the air. The spark that would ignite the inferno came on a hot summer's day, June 28, 1914. In the Bosnian city of Sarajevo, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. The news of the assassination sent a shockwave through the courts of Europe. It was a shocking act of terrorism, a personal tragedy for the elderly Emperor Franz Joseph. At first, for Cecilia and her family, enjoying their summer, it may have seemed like another distant Balkan crisis. They mourned the Archduke, but there was little immediate sense that this event was any different from the crises that had come before. But this time it was different. The intricate clockwork of alliances, ultimatums, and mobilizations began to tick. In Vienna, in Berlin, in St. Petersburg, and in Paris, generals and politicians made the fateful decisions that would plunge a generation into the abyss. The Gilded Age was over. The long, peaceful summer of Europe was about to end in a bloodbath. For Crown Princess Cecilia, life was about to change in ways she could not possibly comprehend. Her husband would go off to war, her country would demand unimaginable sacrifices, and the stable, predictable world she had always known, the world of palaces and protocol, of fashion and family, was about to be swept away forever by the tides of history.
The doors of the gilded cage were about to be blown off their hinges, only to reveal a far more terrifying prison outside, the prison of war. As Germany went to war, Crown Prince Wilhelm was given a command befitting his status. He was made the nominal leader of the German Fifth Army. In the initial push through Belgium and France, he was at the forefront of the German war effort. The state propaganda machine worked overtime to portray him as a heroic warrior prince, a worthy successor to the likes of Frederick the Great. The reality, however, was far more complex. While Wilhelm was not a coward, he was also not a brilliant military strategist. He was a dilettante, more interested in the trappings of command than its grim responsibilities. As the war bogged down into the brutal, static attrition of trench warfare, his enthusiasm waned. His headquarters, often situated in a comfortable chateau far behind the front lines, became infamous for its social life. While millions of men were living and dying in unimaginable squalor, the Crown Prince was known to entertain guests, enjoy fine wines, and continue his womanizing ways. This behavior did not go unnoticed to the soldiers in the trenches, who suffered from lice, shell shock, and the constant presence of death. Their commander's lifestyle was a source of bitter resentment. He became a divisive figure, admired by some for his charm, but despised by many for his perceived frivolity. This disconnect between his duty and his desires was a mirror of the disconnect in his marriage. Wilhelm was a man who consistently put his own pleasure before his responsibilities. While her husband's reputation was being tarnished at the front, Cecilia was forging a new one on the home front. The outbreak of war transformed her. The stylish social princess was replaced by a tireless, dedicated patriot. She threw herself into war work with a ferocity that surprised many. This was not a ceremonial role, it was a calling. She became the heart of the German Red Cross. She didn't just lend her name to the cause, she became its driving force, organizing relief efforts, raising vast sums of money, and coordinating the dispatch of medical supplies and comfort packages to the front. Her most impactful work, however, was far more personal. She spent countless hours visiting military hospitals, walking through wards filled with the broken bodies and shattered minds of Germany's youth. She refused to shy away from the horrific realities of war. She would sit for hours with grievously wounded soldiers, men who had lost limbs, been blinded, or had their lungs scorched by poison gas. She would talk to them, listen to their stories, write letters home for those who could not, and offer a comforting, maternal presence in their darkest hours. There are numerous anecdotes from this period of her quiet compassion. She would often arrive at hospitals unannounced, without the press, to ensure she was seeing the true conditions. She would speak to the nurses, asking what they needed, and then use her influence to procure the necessary supplies for these soldiers.
many of whom were simple farm boys or factory workers. The sight of their beautiful crown princess, her face filled with genuine empathy, was an almost divine vision. She became an angel of mercy, a symbol of the homeland they were fighting for. She was no longer just a royal figurehead. She had become the Landesmother, the mother of the nation. As the war dragged on from months into years, the initial patriotic fervor in Germany curdled into exhaustion and despair. The powerful British Royal Navy had imposed a crushing naval blockade, cutting off Germany from vital imports of food and raw materials. The home front began to starve. The winter of 1916 to 1917 became infamous as the cold Roubaix winter, the turnip winter. The potato crop had failed, and the German people were forced to survive on little more than turnips, a vegetable previously used mainly as animal fodder.
Bread was made with sawdust. Rations were cut again and again. Disease and malnutrition swept through the civilian population. The disconnect between the government's promises of victory and the daily reality of suffering grew into a chasm of anger and mistrust. While the royal family was shielded from the worst of the deprivation, they were not immune to the atmosphere of misery. Through her hospital and charity work, Cecilia was confronted daily with the grim reality of the nation's suffering. She was a mother of young children, and the plight of other mothers unable to feed their own families affected her deeply. She was known to insist that her own household observe the official rations strictly, and she championed public kitchens and relief efforts for the poor. She felt the pain of her people in a way that many in the German high command, including her own husband, seemed incapable of. In the midst of this national agony, in August 1917, Cecilia's dream home was finally completed. She and the children moved into Cecilienhof. The timing was an act of profound historical irony. This house, conceived in peacetime as a sanctuary of idyllic family life, was born into a world of death and deprivation. It was her English country manor, a style now belonging to the enemy. The home she had dreamed of as a place of laughter and light became a place of quiet anxiety. From its windows, she could not escape the reality of the war. Her sons were growing older, and the terrifying thought of them one day being sent to the front must have haunted her. Her fifth child, Princess Alexandrian, had been born in 1915, followed by a sixth, Princess Cecilia, in 1917. She now had 6 children to protect in a world that was falling apart. Cecilienhof was her refuge, but the walls could not keep out the sounds of a collapsing empire. In March 1917, a political earthquake occurred that sent tremors through every monarchy in Europe. In Russia, years of war, hunger, and oppression finally boiled over into revolution. Tsar Nicholas II, Cecilia's own relative, was forced to abdicate. For Cecilia, this was not a distant political event. It was a terrifyingly personal tragedy. Her mother was a Romanov. The Empress Alexandra was her German contemporary. She had spent idyllic summers in the Russian palaces that were now being ransacked by revolutionaries. She knew these people. They were family. The thought of them being overthrown and imprisoned by their own subjects was a chilling premonition. It was a stark warning of what could happen when the sacred bond between a monarch and their people was broken. A year later, in July 1918, the horrifying news would reach a war-weary Germany. The Tsar, the Empress, and their 5 children had been brutally executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg. The news confirmed Cecilia's worst fears. The age of kings, which had seemed so eternal, was fragile. Revolution was not an abstract concept. It was a murderous reality. Meanwhile, in Germany itself, the seeds of revolution were being sown. The turnip winter had broken the people's morale. Strikes became commonplace in factories and munitions plants. The Reich, Germany's parliament, began to find its voice, with factions on the left openly calling for peace and democratic reform. The military leadership under Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff had effectively become a military dictatorship, with Kaiser Wilhelm II reduced to a figurehead. The entire structure of the German state was cracking under the immense pressure of a war that could no longer be won. The Hohenzollern-Dynastie was becoming increasingly isolated, blamed by the people for their suffering, and seen by the powerful as an obstacle to a potential peace settlement. By the autumn of 1918, the German war machine was broken. The final desperate spring offensive had failed, and the Allied counterattack, bolstered by fresh American troops, was relentlessly pushing the German lines back. The army was disintegrating. The High Command finally admitted the truth to the Kaiser. The war was lost. The end came with shocking speed. In late October, sailors of the German High Seas Fleet, ordered to embark on a suicidal final mission against the Royal Navy, mutinied in the port of Kiel. It was the spark that ignited the German Revolution. Within days, the mutiny spread across the country. Workers' and soldiers' councils, modeled on the Russian Soviets, seized control of cities. The authority of the monarchy evaporated overnight. In the midst of this chaos, Kaiser Wilhelm II was at the army's headquarters in Spa, Belgium, seemingly paralyzed by indecision. His generals and his chancellor informed him that the army would no longer fight for him. To save the country from civil war, he had no choice but to abdicate. On November 9th, his abdication was announced in Berlin, and a republic was proclaimed. The following day, the last German emperor slipped across the border into the neutral Netherlands, abandoning his throne and his people. His son, Crown Prince Wilhelm, the heroic commander of the Fifth Army, made a similar choice. Faced with the collapse of the world he knew, he renounced his rights to the throne, and on November 12th also fled to the Netherlands to join his father in exile. The men of the House of Hohenzollern had run, but one Hohenzollern did not run. In Potsdam, Cecilia was alone with her children. She was now the wife and daughter-in-law of exiled monarchs, members of a dynasty that was being blamed for the entire catastrophe of the war. She was surrounded by a population that was angry, hungry, and revolutionary. Her position was perilous in the extreme. A palace official brought her the final devastating news. It was delivered bluntly. "Your Imperial Highness, the revolution has broken out. The emperor has abdicated. The war is lost." In that moment, her entire world, everything she had been raised to believe in, ceased to exist. She was no longer the crown princess. Her sons were no longer heirs to a throne. She was simply a mother trying to protect her 6 children in the middle of a revolution. Her friends and advisors begged her to flee, to take the children and seek safety in a neutral country. But Cecilia made the most courageous decision of her life. She refused. Her husband had abandoned his post. Her father-in-law had abandoned his empire. She would not abandon her home or her children's country. She would stay and face whatever came next. As November 1918 drew to a close, the guns on the Western Front fell silent. The greatest war in history was over. But for Cecilia, a new, more personal battle had just begun. The trial by fire of the war had ended, but now she faced the cold, uncertain reality of a new Germany, a republic that had no place for a crown princess. She was a relic of a fallen empire, a solitary woman standing amidst the ruins of her life, with only her courage and her children to see her through. In the chaotic winter of 1918, Cecilia's position was incredibly precarious. Monarchist sympathizers were being watched, and the more radical elements of the revolution would have gladly seen the entire Hohenzollern family expelled, their property confiscated. Cecilia knew that clinging to old titles and past glories would be suicidal. She had to adapt, and she had to do it quickly. In a move of remarkable political astuteness, she did not retreat into bitter opposition. Instead, she initiated contact with the new government. Her message, delivered through intermediaries, was clear and pragmatic. She, Cecilia of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, was prepared to accept the new political reality. She would live as a private citizen, abstain from all political activity, and raise her children as loyal Germans. In return, she asked for only 2 things: a guarantee of safety for herself and her children, and permission to remain in her home, Cecilienhof. For the new social democratic government, this was an unexpected and welcome proposition.
They had enough problems to deal with, the threat of a Bolshevik-style uprising on the left and a military coup on the right, without creating a martyr out of the popular former crown princess. Her willingness to cooperate diffused a potentially explosive situation. President Friedrich Erhard's government agreed to her terms. She was allowed to stay. This was Cecilia's first great victory in the post-monarchy world. While the men of her family had fled, she had stood her ground, faced down the revolution, and secured a future for her children in their homeland through shrewd diplomacy and a realistic assessment of her new circumstances. She was no longer just royalty. She was a survivor. Her life changed dramatically. She was forced to leave the vast new palace and consolidate her life within the more manageable confines of Cecilienhof. And even there, changes were immediate. She slashed her household staff by over 50%, letting go of the legions of ladies-in-waiting, footmen, and servants that had once been essential to royal life. The grandeur and ceremony of the past were replaced by a new, more sober reality. Perhaps the most radical change and the clearest signal of her acceptance of the new Germany concerned the education of her children. In a complete break with centuries of Hohenzollern tradition, where princes were educated by private tutors, Cecilia enrolled her 2 eldest sons, Wilhelm and Louis Ferdinand, in a local public school, the Potsdamer Victoria Gymnasium. For the first time, the heirs of the German throne sat in a classroom alongside the sons of merchants, civil servants, and professionals. They did their homework, took exams, and were treated like any other students. It was a powerful symbol. Cecilia was raising her children not as princes-in-waiting, but as citizens of the Republic. Despite these efforts to adapt, Cecilienhof did not simply become a normal private home. It inevitably became something else, a kind of phantom court,
for the dwindling but still influential circles of monarchists, aristocrats, and conservatives who longed for the old days. Cecilia was the living embodiment of the lost empire. She was the highest-ranking Hohenzollerns remaining in Germany, and her home became a place of pilgrimage. She hosted a steady stream of visitors, old generals, disenfranchised nobles, and politicians of the conservative right. They would come to pay their respects, to reminisce about the glorious past, and to discreetly discuss the turbulent present. Cecilia navigated these interactions with immense care. She was always a gracious hostess, but she remained publicly aloof from any political plotting, staying true to her word to the government. Nonetheless, she became by default the matriarch of German monarchism, a symbol of dignity and continuity in a world that had lost its moorings. She maintained a quiet but significant influence, not as a political player, but as a cultural icon of a bygone era. For 5 years, Cecilia managed this new life on her own. Her husband remained in exile on the Dutch island of Vlieringen, but in 1923, the political climate in Germany had shifted. The Republic, under the capable leadership of Chancellor Gustav Straußmann, felt more secure. As a gesture of national reconciliation, the government granted the former crown prince permission to return to Germany on the strict condition that he would not engage in any political activity. In November 1923, Wilhelm came home. His return was not the triumphant event a monarchist might have dreamed of. It was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair. He was now simply Wilhelm Hohenzollern, a private citizen. The reunion between Wilhelm and Cecilia Cecilienhof must have been a moment of incredible awkwardness and unspoken tension. The years apart had not healed their marriage. They had merely solidified its demise. There was no longer any pretense of a romantic relationship. They were two strangers bound together by their children and their shared past.
They reached a practical, if emotionally desolate, arrangement. They would continue to live under the same roof at Cecilienhof to present a united front for the family's sake, but they would lead entirely separate lives. Wilhelm took over a wing of the palace, which he renovated to suit his bachelor-like lifestyle. Cecilia remained in her own apartments. He pursued his own friends, his hobbies, and his numerous affairs. She focused on managing the vast household, overseeing the children's education, and carrying out her social duties. Their marriage was now officially what it had been in private for years, a partnership on paper only. For Cecilia, the return of her husband did not end her loneliness. It simply brought it home. While Cecilia and Wilhelm's marriage stagnated, Germany entered a period of extraordinary cultural and economic vitality. After the trauma of the 1923 hyperinflation was overcome, the Golden Twenties saw Berlin become the most exciting city in the world, a hub of artistic innovation, scientific discovery, and social liberation. It is one of the great ironies of this period that while the Republic flourished, so did the fortunes of the family it had overthrown. Many assume that the Hohenzollerns were left destitute after the Revolution. This is far from the truth. After a lengthy and contentious public debate, a settlement was reached between the family and the Prussian state. In 1926, the Hohenzollerns were allowed to retain ownership of numerous palaces, castles, country estates. They reached a practical, if emotionally desolate, arrangement. They would continue to live under the same roof at Cecilienhof to present a united front for the family's sake, but they would lead entirely separate lives. Wilhelm took over a wing of the palace, which he renovated to suit his bachelor-like lifestyle. Cecilia remained in her own apartments. He pursued his own friends, his hobbies, and his numerous affairs. She focused on managing the vast household, overseeing the children's education, and carrying out her social duties. Their marriage was now officially what it had been in private for years, a partnership on paper only. For Cecilia, the return of her husband did not end her loneliness. It simply brought it home. While Cecilia and Wilhelm's marriage stagnated, Germany entered a period of extraordinary cultural and economic vitality. After the trauma of the 1923 hyperinflation was overcome, the Golden Twenties saw Berlin become the most exciting city in the world, a hub of artistic innovation, scientific discovery, and social liberation. It is one of the great ironies of this period that while the Republic flourished, so did the fortunes of the family it had overthrown. Many assume that the Hohenzollerns were left destitute after the Revolution. This is far from the truth. After a lengthy and contentious public debate, a settlement was reached between the family and the Prussian state. In 1926, the Hohenzollerns were allowed to retain ownership of numerous palaces, castles, country estates, and vast agricultural lands, including the magnificent Ulz Castle in Silesia. This settlement made them once again one of the wealthiest families in Germany. They were no longer royal, but they were exceptionally rich. This wealth allowed Cecilia, Wilhelm, and their children to maintain a lifestyle of aristocratic privilege that was a world away from the struggles of ordinary Germans. They spent summers at their Baltic resorts, autumns hunting at their country estates, and lived a life of leisure and comfort. Cecilia managed the family's assets with considerable skill. She ensured that Cecilienhof was run efficiently and that the children received the best of everything. Her second son, the adventurous Louis Ferdinand, exemplified the new modern spirit of the times. Refusing a life of idle aristocracy, he traveled to America, worked on the assembly line at the Ford factory in Detroit, and became a good friend of Henry Ford. He was a prince learning to live in the industrial 20th century. The oldest son, Wilhelm, followed a more traditional and more romantic path. He fell deeply in love with a fellow university student, Dorothea von Salviati, a member of the minor German nobility. According to the strict house laws of the Hohenzollerns, it was an unequal match. In order to marry for love, Prince Wilhelm made a momentous decision in 1933. He renounced his rights as the future head of the family. It was a move that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Cecilia, despite the break with dynastic tradition, supported her son's quest for personal happiness, a happiness she herself had been denied. The glittering, decadent, and creative era of the Weimar Republic was built on a foundation of borrowed money and fragile political stability. In October 1929, the foundation crumbled. The Wall Street crash in New York plunged the world into the Great Depression, and Germany was hit harder than almost any other nation. Unemployment skyrocketed, businesses collapsed, the savings of the middle class were wiped out. Hope and prosperity were replaced by fear and desperation. In this climate of chaos, the German people turned away from the moderate democratic parties and towards the seductive promises of political extremists on the far left and the far right. Street battles between communists and the brown-shirted stormtroopers of a rising new party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazis, became a daily occurrence.
At the head of this Nazi party was a charismatic, hate-filled demagogue, Adolf Hitler. As the Republic began to tear itself apart, the former Crown Prince Wilhelm made the most catastrophic miscalculation of his life. Like many conservative elites, he despised the Weimar democracy. He saw in Hitler's dynamic nationalist movement a tool. He believed the Nazis could be used to destroy the Republic, crush the communists, and restore order. And once that was done, he naively assumed a grateful nation, guided by Hitler, would call the Hohenzollerns back to the throne. Seeking to regain political relevance, Wilhelm began to flirt with the Nazis. He met with Hitler, expressed his admiration for the movement, and signaled his support. He saw it as a clever political game, a path back to power. He could not have been more wrong. Cecilia watched her husband's political maneuvering with, what sources suggest, a sense of deep unease. She had spent a decade carefully building a quiet, apolitical life for her family, successfully navigating the treacherous waters of the Republic. Now her husband was tying the family's name to the most radical and violent political movement in Germany. The period of quiet survival was over. A new, far more sinister storm was gathering on the horizon. The choices made in the coming years would not just determine the future of the Hohenzollern family. They would plunge Germany and the world into an abyss of unimaginable horror. Cecilia's greatest trial was yet to come. In January 1933, the fragile Weimar Republic was dealt its death blow. Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, was appointed Chancellor of Germany. For many conservative elites, including the former Crown Prince Wilhelm, this was a moment of triumph. They believed they had made a deal with the devil and that they could control him. They saw Hitler as a brutish but useful tool to crush the communists, dismantle democracy, and they hoped pave the way for a restoration of the Hohenzollern monarchy. It was one of the most catastrophic political miscalculations in human history. They thought they were taming a tiger. Instead, they had unlocked its cage and handed it the keys to the country. For Cecilia, who had spent the last 15 years carefully navigating a quiet, apolitical existence, this new era would bring her family's greatest moral stain and her own deepest personal tragedies. The gathering storm she had witnessed on the horizon had finally broken, and it would unleash a hurricane of destruction that would sweep away the last vestiges of her world. This is the final chapter of Cecilia's story. Twilight lived out in a broken land, a story of profound loss, final farewells, and the quiet endurance of a woman who had already lost everything but her dignity. The Hohenzollerns' dream of using Hitler was shattered with terrifying speed. The Nazis had no intention of sharing power, let alone restoring the monarchy. Within months of taking office, they consolidated their grip on Germany, establishing a one-party totalitarian state. Political freedoms were extinguished. Dissent was crushed. The dark night of the Third Reich had begun. Wilhelm and his sons were quickly disillusioned. Their hopes of a restoration were publicly ridiculed by senior Nazi figures like Hermann Göring. The family was politically neutered, cast aside by the very regime they had helped bring to power. They were not persecuted in the same way as Jews or political opponents, but they were watched. The Gestapo monitored their mail and tapped their phones.
They were useful relics to be trotted out for propaganda purposes when needed, but they were now powerless. While her husband and some of her sons had been drawn into the regime's orbit, Cecilia maintained her characteristic distance. She remained at Cecilienhof, a private citizen, hosting her circle of aristocratic friends, but steadfastly refusing to endorse the Nazi Party or its ideology.
Her home, once a phantom court for monarchists, now became an island of unease, a symbol of the old Germany existing within the brutal reality of the new. She was living a quiet internal exile, watching with dread as her country descended into militaristic madness. She had seen the horrors of one world war. Now she was about to witness the beginning of another, even more terrible one. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, plunging Europe into the Second World War, the nightmare began anew for Cecilia. The first blow fell almost immediately. Her nephew, Prince Oscar of Prussia, was killed in action in the early days of the Polish campaign, but a far more devastating loss was to come. Her eldest son, Prince Wilhelm, was the great romantic of the family. He was the one who had renounced his dynastic rights to marry the woman he loved. Despite this, he felt a duty to serve his country and had joined the army as a reserve officer. In May 1940, during the invasion of France, his unit came under heavy fire near Valenciennes. Prince Wilhelm was gravely wounded. He was transported to a field hospital in Belgium, where he fought for his life for 3 days, but his injuries were too severe. On May 26, 1940, at the age of 33, Cecilia's firstborn son died. The news shattered her. This was a pain beyond politics, beyond the fall of empires. This was the primal grief of a mother losing her child. He had died fighting for a regime that his father had helped empower and that had subsequently cast their family aside. The bitterness of the irony was absolute. The funeral held in Potsdam turned into an unexpected and politically dangerous event. The Nazi regime had planned a small, private affair, but word of the prince's death spread, and an estimated 50,000 people spontaneously descended on Potsdam to pay their respects. It was the largest unofficial public gathering of the Third Reich. The long procession of mourners was a silent, powerful expression of sympathy for Cecilia and a display of lingering affection for the old monarchy. It was an implicit rebuke of the Nazi regime. Hitler was enraged. He saw this outpouring of monarchist sentiment as a direct threat to his authority. He immediately issued the prince's decree, which explicitly banned all members of Germany's former ruling houses from serving in the military. He would not risk another royal becoming a martyr and a rallying point for dissent. For the Hohenzollerns, this was the final brutal confirmation of their irrelevance and powerlessness. For Cecilia, it was small comfort. The decree could not bring back her son. As the tide of war turned against Germany, life became a living hell. The Allied bombers rained destruction on German cities. The Eastern Front collapsed, and the vengeful Red Army began its relentless advance towards Berlin. By February 1945, the sound of Soviet artillery could be heard in the distance from Potsdam. Cecilia, now 58 years old, knew she had to leave. The Red Army was not known for its gentle treatment of German aristocrats. To stay would mean certain death or imprisonment. The departure from Cecilienhof was a hurried, heartbreaking affair. This was the home she had dreamed of, the home that bore her name, the home where she had raised her children and endured for nearly 3 decades. Now she had just hours to pack a few precious mementos, photographs, letters, some jewelry, before fleeing into the unknown. As she drove away, taking one last look at the Tudor-style gables of her beloved sanctuary, she knew she would never return. It was her second and final exile. She was not leaving her country, but she was leaving her life behind. She fled west through the chaos of a collapsing nation, eventually finding refuge in the spa town of Bad Kissingen in Bavaria, an area that would soon be occupied by the Americans. Just a few months later, history delivered its final crushing irony. Her home, Cecilienhof, was requisitioned by the victorious Allies. In its wood-paneled Great Hall, the leaders of the New World, President Truman, Marshal Stalin, and Prime Minister Churchill, convened the Potsdam Conference. In the very room where Cecilia had hosted teas and read to her children, these men redrew the map of Europe, sealed the division of Germany, and set the stage for the Cold War. The house, built as a private refuge for a German princess, became the public stage for her nation's ultimate humiliation. It is a detail of history so poignant, so perfectly symbolic, that it seems to have been scripted by a Greek tragedian. Cecilia lived out the rest of her life in the quiet obscurity of post-war West Germany. The world she had known was gone forever. Her family estates in the East, including the Great Ols Castle, were now behind the Iron Curtain, lost. She lived a life of greatly reduced circumstances, first in a house requisitioned by a bishop in Bad Kissingen, later in a small apartment in Stuttgart. The former crown princess, who had once set the fashion for an empire, now lived a simple life, sustained by her memories and the support of her remaining family. The losses, however, were not over. In 1950, another son, Prince Hubertus, died suddenly from appendicitis. He was only 40 years old. Cecilia had now outlived 2 of her 4 sons. The following year, on July 20th, 1951, her husband, the former Crown Prince Wilhelm, died of a heart attack at a family estate. Cecilia traveled to Hohenzollern Castle, the ancestral seat of the dynasty in southern Germany, for his funeral. As she stood by his grave, one can only imagine the complex flood of emotions: grief for the charming young man she had once loved, sorrow for the decades of betrayal and heartbreak, and perhaps a quiet sense of release. The central, painful relationship of her life had finally come to an end. She was now a widow. Her final years were quiet. In 1952, she published her memoirs, a brief and discreet reflection on a life that had spanned empires and ages. That same year, she suffered her last great emotional blow, the death of her beloved older sister, Queen Alexandrine of Denmark. It was said that after this loss, her spirit was finally broken. On May 6, 1954, Cecilia's long journey came to an end. She passed away quietly in Bad Kissingen. In a final poignant coincidence, it would have been her late husband's 72nd birthday. Her body was taken to Hohenzollern Castle, and she was buried beside the man who had been both her prince and her tormentor. The story of Cecilia is the story of the 20th century, mirrored in a single extraordinary life. She was born into the seemingly eternal world of 19th century royalty and lived to see it utterly destroyed. She was a woman of immense dignity who endured the indignities of a faithless husband, the horrors of 2 world wars, the rise and fall of a monstrous tyranny, the loss of her home, and the unbearable pain of burying her own children. She was not a great political player, nor a mover of historical events. She was instead a witness and a survivor. Her life is a profound and tragic reminder of the human cost that lies behind the grand headlines of history. She was a symbol of a lost world, a woman of quiet courage who faced the collapse of her civilization with a resilience that deserves to be remembered. She was the last crown princess of Germany, and this was her forgotten,